Well, a very good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for joining me tonight as I discuss my grandfather, the Polish artist Aleksander Żyw. This presentation coincides with the exhibition Before and After, which is currently running at the Scottish Gallery. Now, we did bill this talk as the life and work of Aleksander Żyw, which is rather a large topic, actually. He led a wonderfully colourful life, which is almost impossible to summarise into only 20 minutes. So for this presentation, I've decided to focus my talk on the years which follow the exhibition. So that's the years 1934 to 1951. Now, the man which is staring out of you from your screens, which is a self-portrait painted in the mid-1930s, this was painted in cosmopolitan Paris. And if you told that man at the time of its painting that in 10 years' time you'd be living in cold, rainy Edinburgh, married to a Scottish wife, he would have been completely dumbfounded. I don't think Edinburgh was on Aleksander Żyw's radar as a young artist living in Paris. But this is exactly what happened through choices he made personally, but also down to dramatic world events which were completely out of his control. And let's have a quick look at what those events were. Now, here we are, my great-grandparents, Jacob and Lida Żyw. Aleksander was born in Lida in northwest Poland in 1905 to his parents. Jacob was a lawyer, and he also had a brother, Misha, as well. And the whole family moved to Warsaw when the children were both young. Aleksander was only 6 years old, and so Warsaw was very much his home city. He enrolled into the Academy of Fine Art in Warsaw in 1926, and upon graduating, he was awarded a travel bursary, which was to have great effect on the young artist, because it gave him a taste for life outside of Poland, and he spent his travel bursary traveling often on foot. He traveled to the then Yugoslavia, to Greece, France, and Italy, and it was at this moment that he discovered Italy, and it was really the start of a love affair with Italy, which lasted for his entire life. And here we have two paintings painted in the year of his travel scholarship. So this is Verona on the left and Santorini on the right-hand side, and you can see that amazing whale jawbone hanging down from that archway, just captured with a swift mark of white on the left-hand side of that picture. Now, after his European travels on his bursary, he settled in Paris, and it was in 1934 that he set up a studio and a home in Paris. At this moment, he was living the carefree life of a young artist, spending his summers in the sun-soaked south of France and around the Med, and the winters back exploring the city and refining his technique. And the image on the right-hand side of the screen is Pont de Passy, which is a sort of industrial scene painted in Paris in 1935. And years later, he recalled this time in his life, and I'm just going to read you what he said. He said, "What happy years they were, sitting in the sun of southern France, with beautiful landscapes around me. Unhurried matching colours and putting them on canvas. No need to rush. The sun was shining and would shine again the next day. The light would not change. Like a gourmet taking his pleasure in good cooking, I was delighted, matching and mixing colours on my palette. I think we can all agree that sounds rather fun, actually. And here again, we have two paintings of Corsica captured at this moment in time. Now, this seasonal, untroubled lifestyle was to stop abruptly and dramatically with the outbreak of war. And Żyw was in Corsica when the war broke out, and it might have been not long after these two paintings were painted, and he returned from Corsica swiftly to Paris to enlist with the Polish army, where the Polish army was reforming. And I'm lucky enough to have an entry that my grandfather wrote towards the end of his life, recalling this particular period in his life. And I'm going to read from that again. When war broke out on 3rd of September, I came from Corsica to Paris and enrolled there in the Polish forces, which were being organised as part of the French army. I was sent to Brittany and became one of a company of heavy machine gunners, which is the photo that's in front of you at the moment. The company were specially selected and trained hard. We were fit, hard, and enthusiastic. We were going to liberate Poland. Before long, Żyw was promoted to sergeant, and in his opinion, this was down to the fact that he had a very loud voice, and his division were sent to defend a point where there was a break in the enemy's line. At this point, Żyw was in charge of 13 soldiers, pulling with horse and cart at this time, pulling two machine guns. One cart for ammunition, and one cart pulling the guns themselves. And inevitably, it wasn't long before battle was upon them. And again, this is Żyw speaking again. When we came into position for the first battle, we had time to prepare a proper position for the machine guns. We dug a hole for each gun and another hole for me, so all was well hidden. We were in front of a wood and waited for the German attack. Soon, the Germans appeared on the horizon. I judged the distance, and when they came within range, I ordered my men to open fire. The Germans shot back with mortars. It was terrifying. I was scared to get stiff, but kept quiet and kept on giving orders. The Germans were slowly advancing, and I thought it might be time to retreat. I sent a soldier to investigate the regiment, only to find that there was no one there. I made the decision to retreat, and we found the regiment several kilometers away. They had retired without warning the machine gunners. I was offered a military cross for this action, but I refused it. I thought one should not get a medal for being scared stiff. Now, soon after this, the French surrendered, and the Poles were told to escape the best way they could. And again, this is Alexander's account. We were told to try to make our way to Britain to continue the fight, and advised to destroy our army identification papers in case we were caught. Our HQ records were destroyed. Everything descended into chaos and confusion, and we were all separated. I decided to make my way to the town of Epinal with 2 other soldiers. We discarded our army uniforms and donned blue work overalls to appear as civilians. Żyw and his fellow soldiers stumbled upon a German roadblock and were promptly arrested. Luckily, his two fellow soldiers that Żyw was with were from a German-speaking part of Poland and pretended that the group were Polish workers trying to flee the war rather than soldiers. not knowing what to do with these random Polish civilians, the Germans sent the group to report to the German HQ in Epinal, their original destination. This was one of the most awful and unforgettable points in my whole war experience. We had no money and no papers, and we did not know what to do. I made the difficult decision to give myself up and become a prisoner of war. The prospect was black. I was a Pole, a Jew, a fighting soldier. Now, at this moment, with no other option open to him, he headed towards the German HQ with his 2 fellow soldiers. But as he walked there on this wide street with trees on either side, he spotted something glittering on the road, and it was a small gold medallion of the Virgin Mary. I picked it up. I took it as a sign that I should not surrender. I turned my back on the German HQ and decided I must get out of Epinal. Now, at this moment, Żyw enlisted the help of a friendly Frenchman who advised him to go to the Marie, to the police HQ there. He was given a name to ask for. He did as he was told, and he found this helpful gentleman who luckily managed to provide Żyw with a fake card identity. This was a huge stroke of luck because it enabled Żyw to a document that would mark him as a French citizen rather than a Polish soldier. And this enabled him then to escape Epinal and continue his journey south. Now, there's his wartime account from this period is absolutely fascinating, and there's lots of stories I could share with you. But at this point, I'm going to skip ahead a few weeks, if I may, and tell you in his own words how he made his eventual escape out of France. And before I do, I just like to say that the only way out of occupied France at this moment was to gain an exit visa from the French authorities, and then apply for a further visa for travel through Spain and onto Portugal. The problem was that the French did not issue exit visas to men under 50, which was yet another problem for Żyw, being a young man. But he came up with a typically artistic response to this. And following some local inquiries, he discovered a hairdresser who also worked for the local theatre, and managed to convince this local hairdresser that he was in love with a woman who liked older men. This was obviously the right approach to go for, because the hairdresser instantly agreed to help the young Żyw. He recounts again, "My hair was very black, so he stuck strips of fine, light cotton material onto my scalp. From these strips, white hair seemed to be growing. I bought myself a tube of white paint and a tiny brush and painted every third hair of my mustache white. After this, I had no difficulty obtaining an exit visa." And this is the exit visa that I'm talking about. Now, where were we? Yes, so Żyw has just passed through the customs border, has managed to find himself back in Spain and through to Portugal, which was a neutral country in the war, and on to Britain, thankfully. Now, on arriving into Britain, Żyw was directed to the military camps in Biggar, Forfar and Galashiels, where a great number of the Polish armed forces were reforming. And at this moment, he turned his hand to painting again, capturing the Scottish landscape in the semi-impressionist style, which he had been enjoying in France before the war. It was at this moment that Żyw was appointed an official war artist to Polish armed forces, and his work did not start on the front line, but instead it started immediately on the camps around Scotland, and also aboard the Run, which is a Polish destroyer which he sailed across the Atlantic on. And the drawings made at this period between 1940 and 1943 document the lives of his fellow Polish soldiers, and a selection of which were later published into. Here's just a few more images of this moment, and this is the battleship which he sailed on. So 120 of these were published in the 40s in this rather grand book, Poles in Uniform, which had accompanying text by Edwin Muir and Muirhead Bone, the British war artist. And the book, I must say, it's obviously out of print now and quite a rare thing, but it does present a fascinating cross-section of life in the Polish armed forces. Back to the front. Żyw returned to the front with the first Polish armored division in 1944, landing at Arromanches 20 days after the first D-Day landings. And there's one oil which survives from this period, which is this rather amazing painting on screen now. The first Polish armored division were fighting alongside the Canadian Army with the objective of liberating Falaise, and it was the Battle of the Falaise Gap was some of the most bloody on the Normandy front, and during the battle, 446 Poles lost their lives, and Żyw recalled the devastation and destruction of the landscape of men, machines, and animals, and also the landscape of France, which obviously was home to Żyw not very many years previously. He to capture the battles and his fellow soldiers, he carried with him a satchel with pen, paper, and pen, enabling him to sketch rapidly when constantly on the move. And there's one story which I'd like to share with you in particular from this moment, and it was during one battle. Żyw, well, rather bravely, you could say, adventured to the edge of a dense forest, hoping to see the front line and thus sketch the region of battle. And he'd got out his sketch pad and brushes when coming through the trees towards him were 20 German soldiers, thinking that he was outnumbered, his time was up. He got out his revolver, expecting to have to fight, but miraculously these were 20 German soldiers looking to surrender, and he had no problem escorting them back to the Polish base with nothing more than his pen and sketch pad. But obviously it could have gone very differently instead. Now, moving on a year, we have Żyw back in Edinburgh, and in 1946, Żyw married my grandmother, the Edinburgh local Leslie Goddard, seen here in a rather charming sketch, and together they purchased and restored a derelict house in Edinburgh's Dean Village. And here we have a photo from the early 50s showing, well, Alexander and Bell's Bray, the house that they purchased together, but also my Uncle Michael and Dad Adam as well. It looks like they're just off to school. Now, at this moment in time, which was very brief, Żyw aligned himself with the Edinburgh art establishment, and this came after a successful exhibition at the Scottish Gallery, but he also showed for a number of years at the Royal Scottish Academy and the Society of Scottish Artists as well. And this group of artworks very much aligned with the Edinburgh School of painters, painters like William Gillis and Anne Redpath. And also at this time, he published another book, which was Edinburgh as the Artist Sees It, which is on your screen at the moment. And in the book, he, again, using a similar observational style like he had captured his wartime subjects, offered to capture Edinburgh's familiar sights with a fresh and foreign eye. But so here we have it. So that was published in 1945. But in the following year, in 1946, the true horrors of what had happened in Poland were starting to emerge, and Aleksander tragically discovered that not one of his family in Warsaw had survived the war. And as you can imagine, this was a huge blow for a whole generation of people, but a huge blow for Aleksander. And his life was changed, but also his art changed overnight, changed dramatically. And following this news, he stopped exhibiting for 2 years and spent his time locked in his studio painting furiously. And what followed was a mammoth creative burst. We have just a couple of those images here, which are currently on show at the Scottish Gallery. And in this huge creative outpouring, he turned his back on the conventional painting methods that had started to gain him a decent reputation. And he did again talk about this particular moment in time, and I'm just going to read you a quote from him again. He says, "Instead of painting nature, I began to put on the canvas the struggle and tensions of my inner self. I began to experiment in my work, and in the course of the next few years, my painting passed through many phases. I might call the first of these the period of searching inside myself to see what I could find." Now, this new expressionist language, which Żyw adopted, really reached its peak in the years 1946 to 1949. And these works primarily use the human form gripped by raw emotion as their primary subject, and were executed very, very quickly, very gesturally, often squeezing paint directly out of the tube and onto the canvas. And these seemed shocking to the British public at the time. And I remember one reviewer for a London exhibition in the late 40s says that Żyw has gone berserk. The immense amount of paint on the pictures reminds me of an artist who has to sell his paintings by weight alone. And Bronwyn, thanks for your question. We'll come to that towards the end. Now we're just nearing the next stage of Żyw's artistic journey, and that is that happened. There was a pivotal moment really in 1949, and that was a return to the Mediterranean, a return to France, and a return to Italy. Which really led him to rethink his approach to painting. And his great friend, Douglas Hall, the first keeper of the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art, said that this trip seemed to chase away the dark clouds of Northern Expressionism. And to some extent, that's exactly what happened. The thick paint that he had been using in his post-war works did not vanish, but it became a base layer, often painted in white, which he then built up with multiple colored glazes. And the human figure, again, it didn't completely disappear, but instead of becoming a vehicle for emotion, it became incorporated into a decorative ensemble. And it's perhaps this period of Żyw's work, which he's best known for in Scotland, and the National Galleries have one of the major works of this period, Journey Woven into Imagination, which is very similar to this painting here. But this painting is happily hanging above my brother's mantelpiece. Now, from the 1960s, Żyw spent an increasingly more amount of time in Tuscany, where he and the family had set up an olive oil in the early 60s. An olive oil farm in the early 60s. And at this time, Żyw's art went in yet another tangent, in a new direction, and he developed a new approach to painting with artworks which initially seemed abstract, but were in fact careful, based on careful studies of the natural world. But he continued to exhibit during this time. He had a major retrospective at the in Warsaw, the Polish National Union of Artists, and he had exhibitions in Basel and Paris, and in the UK as well. He continued to exhibit with the Scottish Gallery, I'm pleased to say, but also with the Arts Council, the Talbot Rice, and had a significant retrospective with the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art in the late 80s. His last significant exhibitions in his lifetime were both in Italy, were in Parma and Desenzano in 1991. But recently, before the current exhibition, which is on at the moment, he's been represented in exhibitions in Volterra, in Parma, and in the Borders Museum in Hawick, exhibiting with his two sons, Adam and Michael, who are both painters as well. This is him working on that later period, which I've just mentioned. This is from the 60s. This image. Here's just a selection of his catalogues from over the years. And here we have the current show, which I implore everyone to please come and visit if you can, or please visit online via our virtual rooms. Now this presentation offers just a brief snapshot. 15 years, but a very pivotal 15 years in Żyw's artistic career, and the variety of subjects on show really reflects the dramatically changing life circumstances that he was living through. Out of the complete devastation and suffering and destruction of his homeland, and importantly the loss of his family, emerged a radically altered person and a radically altered artist, with a new body of work, a new language of art that was strengthened by the experience that he had encountered. The war acted as a catalyst for Żyw's art. It obviously interrupted the professional practice that he had been enjoying in Paris, but he also honed and developed new skills by his constant sketching of throughout the war years, which enabled him to abandon a naturalism in favor of a more provocative and subjective art, which came to define his later career. Now it's been 25 years since my grandfather passed away at his home in Castagneto Carducci in Toscana, and I was only 7 when he died, sadly, and I've always regretted not knowing him better. But luckily for me, I feel I have got to know him through the legacy of his paintings, which span an astonishing 70-year career and very much march with the history of Europe throughout the 20th century. They represent an astonishing body of work, and a commitment to his own artistic vision. Often working in isolation. Committed to what he had to say. I do very much hope that this exhibition, small but focused exhibition which is running at the Scottish Gallery, introduces a new audience to the art of Aleksander Żyw, but also provides a reminder and a tribute to the many emigre artists who, in the face of dispossession and displacement after the war, made an enduring and important impact to the British cultural landscape. So thank you all very, very much for joining me tonight. I've just got one last photo to share with you, which is, I know it's a little bit cheesy, but this is myself, my brother, and Aleksander at his home in Lamentano, and obviously taking his grandparenting extremely seriously by reading a book. Bronwyn, thank you for your question. How many languages did he speak, and which was his main one? He spoke Polish, English, French, and Italian, all fluently. Which unfortunately, no, Bronwyn, I don't speak Polish. He actually only went back to Poland once after the war for that exhibition that I mentioned in the late 60s. I think it was a very difficult place for him to visit again, and with having no immediate family there, we didn't have any family to go and visit. So no, unfortunately I don't speak Polish. And thank you again for Monica for your question. Again, I mean, I'm having to speculate slightly, Monica, about how my grandfather felt towards his Jewish heritage. I know that his family weren't practicing Jews, but they did have Jewish heritage, and again, he was a young man when he left Poland. You know, he was as a graduate from the academy. So unfortunately, I haven't been able. Was never able to ask him about the growing anti-Semitism, which again, as we all know, wasn't just confined to the Nazi regime, but was a problem for the whole of Europe at that moment. I'm afraid I wouldn't like to speculate, but I will ask my uncle to see if he can shed any light on that moment. But I do appreciate those questions. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you all very, very much for joining me tonight. I know that we've run over quite considerably, and apologies for the technical problems as well, but the show went on. So I wish you all a very good evening, and thank you all for joining.